This is the third lecture for the cross-media design class of the second year. The third lecture is about our prostheses, about everything that we need apart from our own body. Of course, we're not able to bang in a nail with our hands. We're not able to cut into wood with our bare body, with our bare hands. So we need tools. And tools in general are prostheses. I'm not only referring to the prostheses that people need if they miss a hand or a limb. I'm referring to everything that we are using outside of our own body. And that can mean a car, a ship, and not only a hammer or a nail or a screwdriver or shovels or anything that we need in order to make things possible. In the past, we thought human beings were the only ones who were using tools, but now biologists are already showing that whales and dolphins and chimpanzees that they need tools as well, so that they are using tools. So in that respect, human evolution is, in the framework of evolution at large, a development of doing or using things outside of our own body. So in the framework of this whole program, we moved from the human mind to the human body, and now we're going outside. We're leaving our body, and we are focusing on the tools we need, the prostheses we use in general, whether they be cars or our own bodies, but as an extension of certain processes, but also screwdrivers and hammers. So in a way, this is a kind of transition, a transitional lecture, a transitional small program. And this is linked to the last fourth assignment that is being done in this third semester. So we're moving outward, and you are going to write a text. And I'm going to tell you more about this text, about this piece of fiction, at the end of this lecture. It's quite amazing what you've just seen. One is a science fiction movie, THX 135, which was made by George Lucas prior to his franchise of the Star Wars saga. The other one are French lace workers, elderly women who have this amazing capability of working very fast to make the most beautiful and most intricate, most complex patterns in lace. So what you're looking at right now, looking at this science fiction movie on the one hand, and to these women making lace on the other hand, is about the amazing capability of what we are able to do with our body, with our hands, and the relationship between the human mind and the human hands, and the way these human hands are able to do something. And usually this is based on routine, about doing something again and again and again, thousands of times. And even if these women that were filmed in the 1960s in France, Even these elderly ladies, some of them in their 80s, are still able to work that quickly, to use their mind and their hands that quickly, this kind of motor cognition, which is quite amazing. On the other side, you see this science fiction film, you see this particular scene of a man who's trying to put a small radioactive element into a machine, into the parts of a machine, and well, he doesn't succeed. And there is a kind of indirectness in his action, because the object itself is inside a closed environment. Because it is so radioactive, he's not able to do it himself with his hands, so he needs a tool in order to put this little element, this small radioactive element, into a small hole. So this essentially is about motor cognition, and it's about the things we live with. It is about the gestures we need, and it is about the way we extend our body by means of prostheses. And this is not only, of course, about the human body. It's not only about the body at large. It is about the mind. So the psychic cognition is very closely attached to the motor cognition. It is the exchange between the human mind and the human body. It is between the human mind, the human body, and its prostheses. So psychic cognition is essentially about the things we live with, the gestures we need, and the way we extend our mind into the objects we are able to make, the prostheses.
Son las tijeras más filosas del mundo, cortan cualquier cosa. Y
It is such a wonderful film. And it's such a film, it is so tragic as well. It is a wonderful children's movie, but at the same time, it is a very tragic movie about Edward Scissorhands. And here you can see the prostheses of Edward, and he doesn't have any hands, he only has tools, and the tools are attached to his body. And the reason is that the inventor of Edward died before he was able to finish Edward's body. So essentially, Edward is a kind of half product. And the tragic fact about Edward is that he is not able to interact in a normal way with people. He is a person, at the same time, a person with complications, a disabled person. And disability, being disabled, is one of the smaller parts of this whole lecture. It is about the limitations of the human body, and therefore the reason that the human being needs prostheses, needs tools, needs extensions in order to live a full life. So these limitations are quite interesting to look at, and I'm not only referring to practical tools or practical prostheses, I'm also referring to the symbolical value and the symbolic meaning of prostheses. And essentially in the arts, the whole notion of the human body and the human capabilities always has been a very essential element, a very essential subject for artists. Looking at Edward, I also had to think about a German artist, Rebecca Horn, who worked especially between, between the early 1970s and the early 2000s. and she had this performance called Finger Gloves, which was also extended into Berlin Wende in 1975. So in the early 1970s, she had this performance with extension, with the extension of her hands. And here you can see a photograph, a black and white photograph of Rebecca Horn trying to pick up a paper bag with the prostheses that she attached to her hands. So this is about limitations, about the fact that the hands are longer than normal, but at the same time it also has its disabilities, its limitations. So this performance essentially is about the limitations of the human body, and at the same time the fact that the extended human body has its own special function and also its own special meaning. So here it is an exchange between picking up a bag and using one's disabled body in order to pick up the bag. Another performance, the Berlin Wende, is about the extensions, the human body, these elongated hands who were able to scan the walls of a room. So how big is a room? How big is my body? And of course, the body always has been the standard in order to define and design human habitation. So when does a room feel good? Do you feel good in a room? And to what extent does it respond to the proportions of the human body? Sometimes if a room is too high, you feel rather alienated. Sometimes if a room is too big, you think, oh my God, what am I going to do here? So how am I going to respond to this enormous space around me? So essentially this performance is about the limitations and the possibilities of the human body, and the way the human body is able to respond to the architectonic space in which he finds himself. So essentially this is about what I really would like to talk about with you, about our prostheses, about the limitations of the body, the disabilities of the human body, the possibilities and the potential of the human body, and the way we, as human beings, are using all kinds of tools, all kinds of prostheses, in order to do something, reach something, produce something. The artist, Floris Kijk, a Dutch artist, made this wonderful, rather strange movie about a kind of very rare human illness, metallosis maligna.
Live longer than ever before. Unfortunately, the fragile human body can scarcely keep pace with this modern development. Body parts will have to be replaced more frequently. Nowadays, just about everybody gets an implant during their lifetime. In future, that number will only sharply increase. Metal hip replacements, knee replacements and heart valves. Implants can no longer be ignored. On a worldwide scale, more than 1 million hip replacement operations are carried out. If anything, implants form an even greater growth sector than that of biotechnology.
The problem is, however, that these artificial body parts are, in practice, very much prone to infection. Well, from decades of research since the medical introduction of implants, we can observe that infection occurred within the first 72 hours and was rarely seen after the first week. But recently a mysterious phenomenon has been reported in the medical literature. Scientists refer to it as metallosis maligna. People who have benefited from implants for considerable years still seem to be at risk of getting infected. Every implant reacts against the human body, the so-called graft versus host disease. Well, this disease is often aggravated by a bacterial infection around the implant itself.
During the placing of the metal implant, the onset of this graft versus host disease is delayed by a specific bacteria known as Streptococcus metallomaligna. The body tissue around it can become infected by this bacteria. If an initial infection goes undetected and lies dormant for several years, the implant in turn can be afflicted. When this point is reached, a growth process will take place within the metal of the implant.
This shows that the implant acts as a source for metal tissue growth that rapidly spreads throughout the body. Through this process of growth, important organs and vital body parts are irreversibly damaged.
Initially, the body tissue around the implant becomes irritable and progressively weaker. During the growth process, more lumps appear underneath the skin. During the next phase, metal tissue growth penetrates the skin and becomes external to the body. Sections of the body disappear completely, to be replaced by solid metal tissue. Fact about metallosis maligna is its inherent ability to start and stop at its own discretion. The duration of the disease varies from person to person. Little is known about the disease metallosis maligna. We know roughly how it arises and how it affects the human body.
We're now going to do some simple tests to see how its affected body parts function. Can you make a steady tone with your voice? Can you please try to stand up? I know it'll be difficult, but I'd like to see how you cope with walking.
Metallosis maligna can be seen as the start of a new generation of afflictions which occur as a direct result of mankind's increased longevity. In institutes worldwide, research programs are being set up in order to uncover methods of cure and prevention. Will science succeed in finding a way to combat this extraordinary disease?
One of the most central, most important aims of Floris Kaik, the artist who made this movie, was that things are going viral today so easily that people start to believe many things that are absolutely not true at all. So the whole period, the whole era of deep fake is really affecting what we can believe or what we believe and what we do not believe at all. And as you can see, this film is already a bit old. It's from 2008, but I thought it was a very good example of the way people really can be made to believe that this illness actually exists, because the film was so well made that people really thought, millions of people actually online, people really thought that this was an actual real disease. So in that respect, Floris Kaik is playing with truth and non-truth, and is playing with narrative and whether it's true or not. And so he shows actually that art and that visual culture in general is able to make people believe something, or to make people to flow together with the narrative, so that the narrative itself becomes part of somebody's belief system. And another reason, of course, that I'm showing you this film has something to do with our prostheses, with the relationship between our body and all the things, all the objects that are part of it. And Floris Kaik's film also reminds me of this story that was written somewhere in the 1840s, a kind of, what shall I say, a kind of science fiction avant la lettre, because science fiction was not really existing in the 1840s and 50s in literature. And it is a story, a short story, written by Edgar Allan Poe. You might know him. And the story's title is The Man That Was Used Up, a tale of the late Bugaboo and Kickapoo campaign. And it's humor. It is very light-hearted. It's essentially, it's a kind of, what shall I say, it's a funny story. It's not a very serious story. And it's essentially about an officer, about a general who was so many times so wounded in battle against the Indians that there's hardly anything left of him. The only thing that he still had was his brain, but all the other parts of his body were actually non-existent. So he really relied on bodily prostheses. So he had to be built up, assembled every morning when he woke up. And of course that was a really weird idea about the extensions the human system can use in order to function properly. So The Man That Was Used Up was essentially what I said before, a science fiction story. It was a science fiction story written in the early or halfway in the 19th century. And this, of course, is also a story about the makeability of the human body, leading from the human body as a biological system to the human body as a construction. So the cause and the effects. So the cause is that people need prostheses, but what will be the consequence? What will be the effects after these prostheses are part of the human body, about part of human existence at large? And there was an artist, a Dutch artist, Krijn Griesen, in the 1970s and 80s who put together a whole collection of all kinds of good examples of how people are able to deal with prostheses, or how they create or produce prostheses for themselves, for instance, such as this very good example. A metal worker who made this hollow finger so that he would be able to play the piano because he missed one limb, one finger. So the cause was he lost a finger in his work, but the effect was that he was thinking about the skills he had in order to create a new finger, which was especially made to be able to play the piano. Another very good example is the whole notion of biomimicry. So what you can see in nature are some very beautifully evolutionary developed tools or prostheses. For instance, for a lobster to be able to take something, to grip something, or to crack something. So the principles, the constructive principles of a lobster's fang was translated into these, these human tools, these pliers that were essentially having the same function but also the same construction as the original biological examples. And that is biomimicry. At the same time, what I said before is that animals actually use tools, so it is not an exclusive human activity, it is not an exclusive human evolution. Animals actually use tools in order to make things possible, such as these weapons used by octopuses. And of course, these chimpanzees are using tools as well in order to make something possible, in order to be able to get some honey out of a hollow tree. So tools are ubiquitous, not only in the human world, but also in the animal world. And this, of course, has something to do with the evolution of the human body. Why are we so good at taking something, gripping something? How does the human mind work together with the human body? What is the mind-brain relationship is between the human brain and the human hand, for instance? So the advent, the coming of the thumb, the evolutionary development of the thumb made it possible for people, for humans, to grip something, to take something. So motor cognition was enhanced and developed because these very special parts of our body, the thumb, all of a sudden during evolution came around. And from that moment onwards, the whole notion of the human using tools, extensions, prostheses started to get quicker and quicker and evolve quicker and quicker until the 21st century, where there are so many prostheses around us that we seem to be engulfed in the things that we have developed in the course of many centuries. A long time ago, 800,000 years ago here, for instance, this rock was made by human beings, by early humanoids. It's quite amazing that it was found, because up to a point it looks like, what shall I say, a rock that was affected by erosion, by nature. But if you look very close to it, you can see that it was processed, that it was developed, that it was enhanced to such a degree that early humanoids were able to process all kinds of materials with this very simple rock. They were able to cut things, they were able to use leather and to get flesh from the leather in order to use the leather as a piece of clothing. So again, the hand the head and the body worked closely together in order to make things possible, and this is really part of human evolution. And the acceleration of human evolution throughout the centuries, all the way down to 1,000,000 years ago, all the way up to what we are able to do at this very moment. Well, this is a wonderful scene from one of the best science fiction movies ever made, 2001: A Space Odyssey, by the American director Stanley Kubrick. And this is about that early humanoids, who are still more or less a kind of monkeys, discovered that a bone can be used as a tool and also as a weapon. So the bone you just saw was used in order to kill an adversary. And then this, well, let's say the protagonist of this scene thought to himself, oh my God, this bone can be used as a weapon, and maybe this weapon is able to get rid of, to kill our adversaries. So in a way, technology goes hand in hand with the advent of war, with the advent of conflict. And the reason why I chose to go back and forth, to go from the bone to the spaceship as a kind of development towards our technology, our modern technology, and then back again, has a lot to do with thinking about where things come from. And there's a concept for this. It's called reverse engineering. And reverse engineering is about analyzing and taking an object apart in order to understand its workings, to understand its function. And throughout human history, this whole notion of reverse engineering has been used again and again and again in order to find out how something works and why something functions. So the idea of reverse engineering also has led to certain notions of how we walk, how we sit, what we do, and what kind of tools and prostheses we need. So how does it all start? How did we discover the potential of music? Did people only have their voice, or did they use all kinds of tools that were musical instruments? And this short film I'm going to show is a very good example of how music evolved and how musical instruments became a kind of extension of the human body. And what you see is an are musician, and he lives in the Malaita, the Solomon Islands, and is a film by ethnomusicologist Hugo Semp. Well, isn't that wonderful? This is really essentially the birth of complexity. It looks primitive, but of course it's not primitive at all. First of all, the music itself is very complex. It is essentially the same thing as a modern drum and all the kinds of parts that are used by modern drummers. And it is polyphonic, and it has all kinds of different tones and noises and different octaves, and you can see the deep sounds, the high sounds, and the way they're being used and being processed. It's beautiful. At the same time, there's this intelligence, which is also apparent in the way he's using his body, in the way he is using these parts, these extensions, these prostheses, in order to make this kind of music. But human evolution evolved, and of course I said, well, this is not primitive at all, this making of this music, and that's absolutely true. At the same time, of course, there is an evolution, and there's also a kind of development about what we use with material and how we use material, and what we're able to do with material, and how we're using tools and prosthetics in order to make something. So throughout the centuries, people were more and more good, and they were more able to make these beautiful objects, because there was this kind of intelligence exchange between the human body and the human tools and the human mind, the intentions of the human mind to make something beautiful, to make something worthwhile to look at, and not only to use it but also to look at it. Such as the making of a Xiqing clay teapot, also known as a purple sand teapot. I'm afraid I don't know what the potter's name is. Essentially, this is about repetition, about routine, about a perfect exchange between the human mind and the human body. And repetition and routine is, especially in crafts, incredibly important in order to make something possible. In order to understand the material you're working with, whether it is cloth or whether it is steel or whether it is clay. And this woman you see right here, she must have done this thousands and thousands of times in order to create or in order to make this kind of perfection possible. And this is a very good example of doing something over and over again in order to create this beautiful merging of intention and result. So I'm not only talking about the prostheses themselves, I'm also referring to the fact that the human body has created, has evolved in terms of movement, in terms of perfection, in terms of precision. So you need a certain kind of choreography in order to make something possible, in order to create something beautiful. For instance, the glass blowers at the Leerdam glass factory. Leerdam is a small town not so far away from Rotterdam, and these film fragments are from a documentary, Glass, that was commissioned by the Leerdam glass factory. And it was a documentary made by Bert Haanstra in 1958. And of course, glass is a very difficult material. It really requires a lot of skill in order to turn it into something like a glass or a bottle or any object you can imagine. So what you see right here is a kind of choreography, a kind of choreography of precision, of what is needed in order to make this glass into something beautiful, into something functional. So all these movements essentially are part of the way we deal with our tools, with our prostheses. So there is a kind of marriage between the tools and the human body. And also in this respect, if you compare it to the Chinese clay pots, the Chinese tea clay pot, you can see that also here routine and repetition leads to perfection, leads to a certain merging of the human body, of tools and of material. In this situation, of course, the material is glass, hot glass, glass from a kiln. So the evolution of the human hand and the way the human hand has this connection to the human mind and to the brain has led to this perfection, has led to this kind of production. All the way from thousands and millions of years ago to our very time at this moment in the 21st century. And again, I have to refer to this thumb, to the fact that this human hand has evolved in such a way that this has been made possible. And these hands you see right here is on the left hand side the hand of Philip II, the King of Spain. On the right hand side the hand of Cornelis Tromp, who was a very famous admiral in the Dutch Navy in the 17th century. And today we are witnessing the relationship between the crafts, between the human mind and the human hand, and the new technologies that are becoming part of the production, the industrial process. And I think this is really beautiful about the fact that certain old, let's say between brackets, old-fashioned analog technologies are being merged by digital technologies, such as these Porsche design research and developments, and what these people are able to do with both analog and digital technologies. So what you have seen here are these people who have this amazing capability to make something out of clay. And it's quite interesting that the car industry in this setting, the car industry is still using clay in order to make a shape, in order to make a beautiful shape, and then translating this clay-made shape into a computer. And then the computer starts to make all kinds of calculations, and then it is translated back into clay, back and forth. So you have this kind of, well, on the one hand, this choreography between the analog and the digital, but at the same time, what you see here as well is a choreography with things, with the way we move our body in order to do something, in order to process, in order to change and transform things. And this does not only apply to the high-tech industry of Porsche design, of the car industry. It's quite interesting that you can find this choreography, this perfection everywhere. For instance, in the way traffic signs on the road are hand-painted. And I have multiple videos such as this one, because it's also a kind of celebration of human movements. Because this is also choreography, it is not dance. It is a kind of dance. Because of course the road worker should not touch the wet paint. So applying these traffic signs needs a kind of choreography, kind of movements, so that the wet paint is not affected by the movements. So there is this kind of beauty in the way these marks are being made on the surface of the road. And you can imagine as well that the beauty and the fascination of the relationship between the human body and technology, whether it is analog or digital, has been used in order to create a more symbolical, more metaphysical relationship between body and matter. And a very good example of this, about the kind of symbolic meaning of things and the symbolic meaning of tools and prostheses, has been explored quite extensively by a filmmaker such as David Cronenberg, among other films, in his film Dead Ringers.
What are they? For working on mutant women.
From David Cronenberg, who in The Fly made the fantastic real. Get out of here!
Well, yeah, this is really awful. This is about twin brothers, and they are both gynecologists, and one of them is really, is becoming more and more crazy. So he creates, he develops these tools that are used for gynecological operations, and these tools are quite amazing to look at. They look like animals. They look like something from another planet. They look like something as if they were developed by some kind of aliens. And of course, this also is a kind of free interpretation of the tool, a free interpretation of the prostheses. The man you just saw was Michel Weisfies. He's not alive anymore, alas. And he created these hands, these electronic devices, to make music. The electrical current is running through his body, and the distance between the left hand and the right hand leads to different kinds of sounds. So the human body also is using a kind of choreography in order to develop a certain sound. So you can say that he is his own prosthesis in order to make something possible, in order to make music, in order to make sound. And this is the next chapter in this lecture, which is pretty interesting and also rather frightening, because humans, for a long time, were considered to be the prostheses of an industrial process. And during the Industrial Revolution, many workers were needed in order to create these new products, in order to create these cars and these metal components, and also to make these mass-produced products. And this, of course, is very frightening, because for a long time, and up to a point still, humans are considered to be a kind of extension of an industrial process. And it has this whole thinking of the human as a prosthesis serving an industrial process is a rather frightening idea, a very frightening notion, which has led to also to political movements in order to create better existence for human industrial workers, for instance, which was, of course, tried and analyzed by Karl Marx, and which led, of course, to the advent of communism and to the fact that a proletarian revolution might help the very existence of industrial workers. So there were photographers such as Etienne Jules Marais who were analyzing human movement in order to optimize, well, first of all, to understand how the human body reacts or how the human body functions. But at the same time, this exploration was used in order to enhance the human body and the human mind for the industrial process. And this is very well known. The figure, this woman who is hopping, and this was the first time, actually, you really have to understand, in 1887, Edward Muybridge showed how people move. It was not really known before that time, before the advent of photography, and especially about the advent of photography as a kind of analyzing medium. So for that reason, people started to understand how a horse moves. People had no idea whatsoever how a horse moves. But this sequence of separate photographs and then turned into an animation really showed in a very precise way how a horse moves. So this knowledge, this exploration, these experiments led also to a kind of enhancement of the functionality and the effectiveness of human workers in the industrial complex. Yeah, this was really aptly described what was happening at that very moment during the Industrial Revolution. And this film by Charlie Chaplin, Modern Times, from 1936, really showed the consequences of the human as a prosthesis in the industrial complex. So, being effective, being part of a certain speed and being part of a certain kind of perfection led to all kinds of analysis of how the human body functions in an industrial environment. And it was especially Frank Bunker Gilbreth who was hired by the industrialists in order to say, can we make it more effective? Can these prostheses, these human beings, these prostheses, can they be made more effective? And the more effective they are, the cheaper they are as well. And the cheaper the products become, and therefore the more products are being purchased by the people who need them. So cheaper by the dozen, time and motion studies had a very clear, productive goal. For instance, Gilbreth attached small little lamps to the body of people doing a certain repetitive work, repetitive function, such as this woman on the left-hand side. So how does she move? Could it be made more effective? Or a blacksmith on the right-hand side. A blacksmith, how does he move? How does he wield his hammer? Is it an effective movement? Could it even be made more effective? And for that reason, it became a goal for many industrialists to say, can we make the human being, let's say the human prosthesis, can we make this more functional? And what you see on the upper row, you see the old way with which people were doing their work. In the middle, you can see that people, after they were advised by Gilbreth to say you can do it in a different way, and then you are able to be more productive. So essentially it was really a kind of influence of the choreography of movements. Make this movement choreographically more functional. Could it be more effective? And the woman you see all the way down, well, this woman was the world champion typewriting. So what you have seen is not only about function, and also not only about the relationship between the human body and the tools he or she is using. It is also about the beauty of movement while using the tools. So for that reason, the next chapter is about the aesthetics of prostheses. And one of the design officers very clearly committed to looking at the beauty of human movements and also the beauty of the human body and the products that are growing out of this beauty were Charles and Ray Eames in the first half of the 20th century. So Eames' design office created many different kinds of tools and different kinds of prostheses in order to enhance human existence, human life, such as the chairs they developed and the furniture they developed. Well, this is really a celebration of the inventiveness of the human mind. The funny thing, of course, is that spinning tops only have a function as a toy. At the same time, the whole principle of the gyroscope is based on spinning tops. It is a spinning top. And the whole GPS technology depends on gyroscopic effects and gyroscopic technology. And this film was made by the Eameses as a celebration of their enormous collection of spinning tops, but also a celebration of human inventiveness. Because all over the world these tops are made and produced. And sometimes they're very industrial, and sometimes they're very, well, what shall I say, primitive, or let's say easy to make. But at the same time, there is a kind of complexity involved in when a top is functioning properly. So you can imagine that this whole film about spinning tops, which is a kind of overview of the beautiful collection of Charles and Ray Eames, also has led to shapes which are both functional and beautiful, which has a functional meaning but also a symbolic meaning. On the left-hand side you see an Asmat ritual pigment dish. So manioc, that's a kind of compound which is used to eat by the Asmat people of New Guinea. There is a correlation between this beautiful ritual pigment dish and the leg splint that was developed by Charles and Ray Eames. And on the right-hand side you see a drawing by Ray Eames, which is using the principle of the leg splint in order to make an artwork. So this relationship between symbolic, artistic value and functional value is fantastic. It's fascinating, and it also defines the power and the spirituality of the human mind. Here you see the splint again, but now as an arm splint for somebody with a broken arm. So and then you can of course move on with the evolution of the prostheses, literally, because these are high-tech prostheses used for running by the athletes M.A. Mullins and the South African athlete Oscar Pistorius. They both miss the lower part of their legs, but they were still able to be high-tech athletes, reaching speeds that were really incredible. It was hardly imaginable that people with a prosthesis were able to reach such high speeds while running. So this is a further development of running all the way from the leg splint by Charles and Ray Eames all the way to the high-tech prostheses developed for people like M.A. Mullins and Oscar Pistorius. And M.A. Mullins especially was really an advocate of disability, of people with disabilities, and she really she laments the fact that people with disabilities are considered to be weak and are considered to be substandard as human beings. And she, as an activist, has to say the following about this.
I'd like to share with you a discovery that I made a few months ago while writing an article for Italian Wired. I always keep my thesaurus handy whenever I'm writing anything, but I'd already finished editing the piece, and I realized that I had never once in my life looked up the word disabled to see what I'd find. Let me read you the entry. Disabled, adjective. Crippled, helpless. Useless, wrecked. Stalled, maimed, wounded, mangled, lame, mutilated, run down, worn out, weakened, impotent, castrated, paralyzed, handicapped, senile, decrepit, laid up, done for, done in, cracked up, counted out. See also hurt, useless, and weak. Antonyms: healthy, strong, capable.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful, that was a very wonderful presentation. And of course she's right, because what is that, disabled? What is a prosthesis? Especially because a prosthesis can be a beautiful part of somebody's body and can also have a function which is even better than the original limb. And here's a beautiful limb developed for M.A. Mullins by the fashion designer Alexander McQueen in 1999. And she's using these limbs, these prostheses, while attending, what shall I say, a very posh dinner. She starts to wear them. So this is, of course, a redefinition of a prosthesis, making a prosthesis beautiful and meaningful. So these prostheses, M.A. Mullins is using them as a symbol, because a symbol of I am disabled, but at the same time I'm really able to do anything other people can do as well, and sometimes even better. And her stance was a reason for the American artist Matthew Barney to include her and her prostheses in his films. And these films were made between 1994 and 2002, and it was titled The Cream Master Cycle. And the Cream Master Cycle is essentially a kind of amalgam of all kinds of narratives, all kinds of stories, which are both high-tech and old-fashioned. A kind of overview, a kind of mix of stories about a relationship between the good and the bad, let's say between emotions and facts, between myth and reality, between old-fashioned technologies and new technology. It was essentially a kind of amalgam of human existence at large. And here you can see M.A. Mullins again with these beautiful crystal limbs, these crystal prostheses. And on the right hand side you can see Matthew Barney himself, who was an actor, who was the protagonist in all of the 5 movies he has made within the framework of the Cream Master Cycle. And this was Cream Master 3. So there were 5 films, Cream Master 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Each one has its own story, each one told a different story, but at the same time the aesthetics of the story were very much aligned. And the stories were recorded on very large discs. At that time, in the end of the 1990s and beginning of the 2000s, There were not yet DVDs, high quality DVDs yet, and image discs, and they were about as large as a vinyl long playing disc. They were about 35 centimeters in diameter. They were sold for a very large amount of money, about $1 or $2 million each, and with an edition of 5. And each disc came with a showcase. So the 5 films each had their own showcase, and they were sold, most of the time they were sold to museums or private collectors. And here you can see them, the showcases. And in each of these objects you see inside the showcase was one of these very large laser discs or image discs. Well, this was quite a project, and it required much more money than what is usual in the art world. I'm talking now about contemporary art and about investments in movie making. But what you can see here in this whole trailer is about the objects, about the prostheses, whether it be cars or revolvers or handcuffs or saddles or whatever. So there is this intense relationship between the protagonists and the objects they're using. And I'll show you some very good examples. Cremaster 4 is one of the 5 movies produced by Matthew Barney, and it consists of a motor race of specially designed motors on the there's this chase on the island of Man. Man is an island between Ireland and the United Kingdom, and these motors are objects as well. They are sculptures. And they are sold as sculptures as well, so they're not merely props for a movie, they are sculptures, prostheses in themselves. And another example is this very beautiful silver saddle, which is a prop, but also at the same time an artwork in the framework of Cremaster 2. You see these 2 line dancers, these Western line dancers, in this specially designed space, and so this is an artwork, but at the same time a functional part, a functional object if you want to ride a horse. So there's this symbolical, aesthetic relationship between the object as a functional object, as an extension, as a prosthesis of the human body. So things, they have a life. Because there's so much attached to the human body, to the human existence at large, that things do have a life. And the life of things is the subtitle of a magazine. And this magazine is called MacGuffin magazine. It was started in 2015 by Ernst van der Hoeven, Kirsten Algera and Sandra Kassenaar. And each magazine is dedicated to a very specific prosthesis, a very specific object with its own functional and symbolic value. For instance, the chain. What is a chain? A chain can be worn by a hip-hop artist. A chain also is part of nautical industry, such as shown in this photograph by Isamba Kingdom Brunel, who is portrayed right here in front of the chains that are used to for the Great Eastern Steamship. That's a chain as well. A chain can also be a chain of people running all the way from the capital of Lithuania, Vilnius, all the way up to Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, after they were liberated when the Soviet Union fell apart. Then they became independent countries. And in order to symbolize that, to symbolize their newfound liberties, millions of people living in these countries created a chain, giving each other a hand all the way from Vilnius to Tallinn. So this magazine is essentially about human prostheses, about the relationship between humans and things, between humans and prostheses. So you can imagine it's very diverse, because the subject itself is incredibly diverse, with different texts and different relationships, but different connections, different associations to the objects people surround themselves with. Another good example of the activities of MacGuffin magazines and the people behind it is Finders Keepers. It's essentially an amalgam, a whole range of collections collected by people who are fascinated by these objects, whether they be handcuffs or objects to clean carpets with, or ropes, or parts of a building, of stools. So they each have their own beauty. And each of them is an extension of the human body. The stool, the case, the traffic sign, the handcuffs, and so on and so on. Even plastic bottles found on the streets, or the tops, the lids of coffee cups. This enormous human diversity essentially is a celebration of human inventiveness. It's quite interesting to see how people sometimes can be obsessed by something, are obsessed by things such as Luigi Lineri, who collected stones from the river in his province in Alto Adige. So when a stone resembles a human face, or when a stone resembles a gun, or resembles a sheep's face or a fish, he created a new collection. So each collection in the enormous collection of stones of Luigi Lineri is part of an association. This stone looks like a fish, like a sheep head, or like a human face. So the things in this sense is also a celebration of how people are looking at the world, are looking at the physical world.
Mi insomma frequentavo sempre l'Adze, Gravuro, ma da piccolo mi è sempre piaciuto andare all'Adze e vedere sempre un uomo là che era diverso dagli altri uomini, perché era là con già in città romana, i sassi, faceva montagnette dei sassi e ogni giorno lo guardavo, a un certo punto volavo e dico, ma ti, cosa hai fatto qua? Ma che ti non sei un pescatore, non ti sei un contadino, chi sei tu?
Il 1° maggio del 1963 un mio amico mi ha chiesto vieni con me, dai andiamo a fare un giretto e abbiamo cominciato a raccogliere delle selci. Lui si preoccupava di raccogliere selci e che cercava punte di freccia, no? E io sono andato e ho cominciato a guardarmi attorno, però mi ha appassionato tantissimo prendere in mano la selce, no? Capire che era stato lo strumento iniziale dell'uomo, così. E ho iniziato a raccogliere e a studiarlo, all'inizio con difficoltà, non capivo le forme, vedevo che si ripetevano, poi ho cominciato a interpretarle e la prima forma che ho letto è stata la testa della pecora, subito dopo la testa del pesce, qualche rara forma di testa umana, ma però era molto molto raro trovare. Invece trovavo tutte queste forme enormi, la grande madre per esempio, che non era come me l'aspettavo, stavo rimparando una lingua, è un poema prima delle scritture, quindi che ci ha portato probabilmente alla scrittura. L'idolo, no? L'idolo, si pensava gli idolatri, perché adoravano una pietra, ma non adoravano la pietra. L'idolo, idolo in greco vuol dire spirito, vuol dire fantasma. La pietra richiamava, come tutto questo gioco immenso. Quello che spaventa è che non siamo più capaci di leggerlo. Ha quasi paura. Qui c'è stata della gente che è entrata, vado via. Cioè come se ci fosse paura di questo ingombro, di questo ricordo, eccetera. Basta guardarsi attorno, c'era la vicinanza con il mistero della vita, con il mistero della forma, il mistero degli animali, dell'uomo che capisce, che cerca di capire quello che non capisce, che non capirà mai, e io penso proprio che il primo che si è messo a pensare sia come me. Non si è camminato niente.
It's quite amazing that this man has been collecting these stones for so many years. And it really is, it shows also the obsession of man. It shows also the ongoing fascination for the material world. At this moment, in the 21st century, we're dealing with new technology, we're dealing with the internet, we're dealing with the fact that today modern objects we surround ourselves with also have a voice, are also able to communicate by means of the internet. For instance, a Tesla car is serviced from a distance. So if there needs to be a firmware update somewhere in California or Texas, the management, the technological management of Tesla is able to do a firmware update with a car which is somewhere in Europe. So the Internet of Things is about the fact that things can be used as a means of communication. So the thing, in that respect, like the car, the prosthesis is able to communicate with you. Is not only able to communicate with the object, but also with the person using that object. And this is a very simple diagram about how this is happening. And especially how this really is how this affects human existence at large. So there is a closer and closer connection between us and technology becomes us, and we become technology. And, you know, there's some very, what shall I say, viral, quite extreme examples of how the Internet of Things is affecting the things and who we are and what we know and what we do. In 2017 already, a smart teddy bear leaks 2 million private conversations between parents and kids. Because there was a connection to the Internet and there was also a little microphone inside a smart teddy bear. So there was this exchange which was not wished for by the people who purchased this teddy bear for his child. And in 2025, there was even an AI, artificial intelligence enabled teddy bear. It was suspended after it gave advice on BDSM sex and where to find knives. Well, that is hardly good information for a 3-year-old. So these, what shall I say, these scandals hovering above these very cute teddy bears in 2017 and 2025 is already revealing, already showing the discussion around high technology. And my research into this whole field of the relationship between analog and digital technologies, I've centered these focused on techno-animism, about the fact that animism as a means of communication with nature and with things that seem to have a spirit of their own, is a very big, very interesting discussion right now in the 21st century. So there could be a development and advent of techno-animism. And a very good example of an early internet is symbolized, shown by the stone garden, the Bak-i Sanji, who put it together, and the man who put it together was Darvish Khan Esfandiyaspur, who was a gardener in Tehran, in Iran. But his garden was demolished due to real estate developments in the capital. So from that moment onward, after having lost his garden, he decided to go to the desert and to create a new garden, a stone garden, full of stories. I used to have a student from Iran, and she told me that she and her family used to go to the desert on Sundays in the car to hear the stories of this man. And he performed, as you can see, he danced and he told stories. And each story, each rock in this rock stone garden was imbued with a story. So there was this kind of connection between stones, and it functioned about the same way as the internet does, with hyperlinks and with all kinds of ways, all kinds of connection between one stone and the other. It was all created by him. It was a very small kind of early analog internet. And this is really interesting because the relationship between the analog world and the digital world needs to be redefined by means of reverse engineering. So there is a very close, very intimate connection by means of the prostheses we surround ourselves with. So this soul catcher from the Canadian Northwest has this kind of intimate connection with this smartphone, with the way stories, narratives are inside an object and is able to communicate with us, having a very intimate relationship with people who use them. And my direct association with what I've been telling you is this quotation by André Robbe-Grillet, a thinker, a writer from France. And what he has to say about the writer Franz Kafka has a lot to do with this head and hand relationship, with what we think and how we feel and how we translate this feeling with the objects we surround ourselves with and the actions with which we create these objects, these prostheses. The hallucinatory effect derives from the extraordinary clarity and not from mystery or myth. Nothing is more fantastic, ultimately, than precision. Connected to what I've been telling you and connected to this lecture is the next assignment. And this is the last assignment of the third semester. I'm inviting you as an assignment to write a science fiction story. And a science fiction story, of course, really has to do with, do I like science fiction and do I like to write? Or do I like to write fiction? And the reason why I think it's really important to write fiction is that you are going to be invited to write a thesis in the 4th year. And you are invited to write and to read certain books as part of the theoretical program of the Archi. And what I think is really good is to find a certain way to write, to be easygoing about writing and about the relationship of thinking and writing. And for some people it is much easier, much lighter to write fiction rather than to write something which can be considered a kind of non-fiction, such as a thesis or a paper. So it is essentially something which might, in the best way, help you to develop this easygoing relationship between thinking and writing, between association and writing, between thinking about a future and writing. And science fiction is not really only about, thanks God, only about hardware, about rockets or satellites or computers. No, science fiction essentially is about human mind. It's essentially about the psychology of people. So, as cherished prostheses, such as the artificial legs of Aimé Mullins, the body extensions, a cherished memory embedded in an object? Do you have that? Is that something? Is a mobile phone a cherished, does it contain a cherished memory embedded in an object? And your science fiction story can be based on olfactory and visual and haptic and auditory elements. So I want to say with this that all our senses can have a function in a future understanding of humanity. And essentially a science fiction story is about this. It's about what is going to be the future of humanity. What is going to be the future of our world? So the assignments, the fourth and last assignment of the third semester, is writing a science fiction story. The minimum number of words is 1,000 and the maximum number of words is 2,000. And what you're going to submit is a single page PDF, standing A4, and the deadline is going to be February the 15th, 2026.